looks like college leaders, lobbyists, and their donors are very anxious about the next Trump era. President-elect Donald Trump has been vocal about the changes that he could make in the education department, like, for instance, giving parents more say over what children learn rather than the federal government deciding that. There could also be a rolling back of protections on some trans issues like keeping men out of women's sports, and also the possible privatization of the student loan process. Now, according to a June 2023 Gallup survey, 32% of Americans have little or no confidence in U.S. higher education. The same survey, conducted in 2015, had 10% of Americans in this category.
The University of Massachusetts Amherst and Wesleyan University have meanwhile emailed international students and staff advising them to return to campus before Trump takes office for a second time on January the 20th. The University of Massachusetts said in a statement, based on previous experience with travel bans that were enacted in the first Trump administration in 2016, the Office of Global Affairs is making this advisory out of an abundance of caution. Last month, Yale hosted a webinar for international students and scholars about potential immigration policy shifts. While the president-elect has said that the crackdown will be on undocumented or illegal immigrants, are legal immigrants also possibly subject to policy change? To break all of this down, we're joined by Lynn Pasquerella, president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Lynn, welcome to Rising.
Thank you so much.
So first of all, is there a number one concern, would you say, in academic circles about the incoming administration?
Well, this is a crucible moment for higher education. We have seen a good deal of uncertainty with respect to President-elect Trump's second term. The primary concern on the part of many people is what is perceived as a rapid decline in academic freedom, freedom of expression on college campuses, the unprecedented intrusion into what gets taught on our campuses, who teaches it, how it's taught, and who gets admitted, things that in the past the Supreme Court has held are essential not only for strong higher education system, but also for our democracy.
Can you talk about the fears that immigrant students might be feeling, this guidance for them to be back on campus by a certain date? My recollection is that Donald Trump himself has said that he wants to offer more kinds of easier immigration status, smoothing a process for immigrants who are particularly getting a higher education, that he doesn't like the automatically sending them back to their countries after they finish the education, that sort of thing. But I get that there's a fear given the overall kind of rhetoric about immigrants.
Yes, the threats to curtail immigrant students, to make it more difficult for students to get visas, affects about 5.6 million students from immigrant families who attend U.S. colleges and universities. President Trump has vowed to eliminate DACA, which impacts about 141,000 students. And I have just returned from several weeks presenting in China, in Nepal, in Qatar. And in each case, students and faculty are asking about the implications of students being able to study here, about international exchanges, which are so important to thriving in academia, one of the strengths of global higher education. So there's concern about what this will mean and whether he will try to impose travel bans in the way that he did in his first administration.
I wanted to get back to the point of academic freedom, which you mentioned a few moments ago, Lynn, because that is obviously a very vexing topic in the political sphere. And people on the right have argued for quite some time that the academy generally is left-leaning, too much so in their view, and is, as it were, sort of infusing American youth in particular with more progressive ideas. But obviously, by virtue of the way you have framed the issue, I'm assuming you see it as very different from that. You see it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, as conservatives or MAGA type people trying to impose their ideological framework on people teaching at colleges and universities. What exactly is the danger that you discern there?
The strength of American higher education is in part derived from the fact that it's free from governmental intrusion. The kind of education that is distinctly American, a liberal education, presupposes the free exchange of ideas and the unfettered pursuit of the truth. When we have laws that are being passed in states across the country that are prohibiting the discussion of so-called divisive concepts around race, gender, sexual orientation, then that impedes the ability for academics to do their job. There's been widespread concern over the past few decades. We've seen a rapid decline in public trust in higher education based on a number of factors. Higher education is too expensive, too difficult to access, doesn't teach people 21st century skills. But the primary concern coming from missives like Project 2025 is that our campuses are bastions of liberal progressivism that are intent on brainwashing the next generation of snowflakes. And so that notion of liberal indoctrination has become the dominant narrative, and it has led to J.D. Vance, Vice President-elect, saying that higher education is the enemy. So at a time not so long ago, higher education was viewed as a cornerstone of the American dream, and now there's been a decoupling of higher education from the American dream for many people.
There is an overwhelming ideological bias toward progressivism, toward the I mean, there's much further on university campuses compared to the American public. We just elected a Republican president, even won the popular vote, so can't say it's just some gimmick of the Electoral College, where I see surveys of faculty members at elite schools where it skews 99% and then some in favor of donations to Democrats versus Republicans, et cetera. I agree with you on the importance of intellectual diversity and the importance of our institutions, and I don't want to throw in with people who are maligning the entire our American, our very valuable education system, although I think I would argue that it has become really outrageously expensive compared to the benefit that some students get out of it, and not being enough to justify that exorbitant cost and the amount of debt they take on. But to stay on the intellectual diversity and academic freedom topic, and that is something, Democratic administrations have also imposed some guidance on how these institutions, which do receive a lot of government, public funding, are going to be run. Is there some trade-off between saying, well, if we're going to get the public's funding, we have to be somewhat in tune to the views or attitudes of the public, rather than just, if we could do things totally the way we wanted if we weren't totally distinct from government funding mechanisms. Do you see my point?
I do, but I think here is the danger of replacing one ideology with another. I think that there is a false narrative around the notion that we are brainwashing our students. Our goal is to teach students to think critically and with understanding, and there are some important studies that show that those students who have had a liberal education that does engage them in the free exchange of ideas and humanistic identification, imagining what it's like to be in the shoes of another different from oneself, are less likely to adopt authoritarian attitudes. A study coming out of Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce by Tony Carnevale. So we want to make sure that if we are allowing students to engage in this free exchange of ideas, that we're not imposing on them just a different type of what is perceived as an illiberal ideology. And that's the fear when the Project 2025 says we're going to mandate civics education grounded in the Western tradition. We're going to eliminate discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not going to allow courses in gender or sociology, anthropology, because they are too liberal. So this is something that should be within the purview of educators, experts, and we're at a time when there is a disdain for expertise. And I fear that we've created some of this, and Michael Sandel, a philosopher out of Harvard, talks about the fact that the stigmatization of the poorly educated is the last acceptable prejudice in the United States. And there is real concern that academics are elitist and looking down on those who haven't had access to education at a time when it's more important than ever as a socioeconomic driver.
And Lynn Pasquerella, we appreciate you joining us on Rising. Great conversation, and thank you once again.
Thank you.